Uh, Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to welcome you to this PAFSO presentation on the new Foreign Service Directives. I'm Pam Eastville, the president of PAFSO, and I have with me Paul Raven, our chief negotiator, and Bertrand Mir, our general manager. Um, I'm really happy about the progress that the team made, Paul and the negotiating committee made on getting us a very good set of changes to the Foreign Service directives. I will let him go into the specifics of the major changes, but in general, we're seeing we think it's been a win-win for both us and for the employer side. There's a lot more flexibility in these new directives, to recognize people's specific situations and allow for common sense solutions. We see things like greater flexibility for travel, better support for, children with disabilities, dependents with disabilities, more flexibility in declaring adult dependents, and a whole bunch of very, very useful things. So since Paul has quite a long presentation to go through, there's something like, 74 slides, I think. I'm going to turn the floor over to him pretty quickly, but I did want to say, je pense que Paul va parler en anglais. Pour la plupart de la présentation, mais vous pouvez poser des questions et faire des commentaires dans la langue de votre choix. And also, just one thing, I will keep track of the questions and we will deal with them mostly at the end. We'll kind of group them together into themes where we can. And try to answer as many of them as possible. But I just do want to emphasize that this is not an opportunity Paul's not going to be able to get into individual scenarios. So if you have a very specific question about your personal situation, we recommend that you email info at pafso.com and get put in touch with Paul or Monique, our other labor relations advisor, and they can help give you some guidance. Before I continue, I just would like to remind everyone that I'm chairing this session from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and acknowledge and respect them as the past, present, and future guardians and caretakers of these lands. And I encourage all of you to just pause for a moment and give a thought to the traditional people of the territory where you are and what this means for all of us for the lives that we're all leading today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my own video and my own audio and turn over the floor to Paul for his presentation. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks. Good evening. So before I get to the deck, just a few housekeeping pieces. As Pam mentioned, we won't be taking questions that relate to personal or individual circumstances. Secondly, also, as Pam mentioned, it's a very long deck, so I've structured it a little bit differently. Rather than mix in or intersperse the biggest changes with everything else, I've front-loaded the deck with the biggest and most impactful changes. That way, if you've got other things going on, you don't necessarily have to stay for the full presentation. All right, it's just occurred to me that I'm much more fluent with Teams than Zoom, so hopefully I can share my screen correctly, or just give me a moment to pull up the deck.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, you should see the little green arrow in the middle of your screen
Yeah,
on the bottom.
I think I've got it. Okay. Let's try this, see if this works. Okay. We're seeing the deck. We're seeing me. I hope we're all good.
Oh, good.
You can see the deck, Pam?
Yes.
All right. So a little bit of context before we get into the actual changes. Let me see if I can push this up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Before we get to the actual changes, talk a little bit about cyclical review. what's happened over the last couple of years. So cyclical review is the type of negotiation process that we use at the National Joint Council, abbreviated as the NJC. It's a co-development process. It's different from collective bargaining in a variety of ways, but one of the biggest ones is it's not just PASO going up against Treasury Board at a table. There's multiple parties at the same table, all working together to try and update either one or a series of directives. At the FSD table at the NJC right now, we have us, PSAC and PIPS on the bargaining agent side, and TBS, GAC, IRCC, and D&D representing the employer. So we started this round in 2023. We filed proposals in the summer of 2023. Then there was a number of preliminary steps, kind of fall 2023 and winter 2024. Then we were actually at the table from March to November last year, 2024. And when I say at the table, is basically 2 half days a week for the most part for that period. And then just recently, basically January, February, we had the directives signed off by all the appropriate parties, including the president of Treasury Board and the NJC executive. And an important point here is that these new directives, while they've been published, they don't actually take effect until April 1st. So if you have any FSD related things that come up between now and the end of March, technically it still falls under the 2019, or what I may be calling moving forward, the old version of the directives. All right, so as I mentioned, I've kind of broken the deck up into what I'm calling particularly significant changes, and I think I called the other part other significant changes. So roughly the next maybe 15 to 20 slides will cover what I believe to be the most impactful changes. So first, we'll talk a little bit about atypical expenses. So there have been a number of occasions, particularly during the pandemic, but also before and after the pandemic, where the employer has basically taken the position, sorry, we'd love to help you, but there's nothing in the directives that gives us the authority to approve the expense that you're looking to have reimbursed. Well, we now have new language in the general section of the FSDs that basically provides the employer the discretion to approve almost anything as long as it relates to service abroad. They can approve almost anything. So now it's still discretionary. So that means they get to decide, the employer gets to decide whether they're going to approve something or not, but they can no longer use the excuse, sorry, we don't have any authority to approve this, because now they have authority to pretty much, as I said, approve what they want, providing it's related to service abroad. Okay. Moving into FSD2 definitions. So we made some changes to the definition of dependent that I hope will be helpful. Some have already commented that this will hopefully be helpful for bringing parents of employees or parents of spouses or common law partners to post. There were a few problems with that, with the previous definition. Firstly, it kind of tied it to the definition of common law partners. So there were some administrators who were interpreting that language to mean that basically, in order for a parent to qualify as a dependent, they had to meet the same benchmarks and standards as someone trying to become a common law partner. So that language has been removed, that tie between common law partner and other dependents. But we're also allowing now for situations where maybe you'd like someone to be moving with you to post, but they're not yet there. The previous language required these special category of dependents to already be living with you at post. And that was obviously challenging if someone's ability to care for themselves perhaps declined while they were in Canada, well, if they weren't already living with you at post, they couldn't qualify as a dependent. Well, we've adjusted the language to acknowledge those situations now. So hopefully it'll be easier moving forward to get people who aren't children or spouses to become dependents and be able to be at post with you. All right. There have been some changes to what's required in terms of designating someone as a common law partner. There used to be two pieces. One was the 1 year of cohabitation, and the other was what we called financial ties. So things like joint credit cards, filing taxes together, that kind of thing. So the financial ties are gone now. The only requirement for common law status is that 1 year of cohabitation. So hopefully that will make things a little bit easier and smoother. I know it's been difficult over the years to get someone designated as a common law partner. Okay, this is a long one. I'm not going to read this out loud. I'm just going to summarize it. So many of you have probably already heard about this one. So we're taking a new, more flexible approach to relocations. So what does that mean? Well, there are certain things that you will be allowed to forego, so not take advantage of, and those things include, for example, if you qualify for business class and you decide not to travel business class and travel economy instead, if you ship less than your weight entitlement in terms of belongings, if you don't use long-term storage, those are the big ones. I may be missing one. But anyhow, if you don't do one or more of those things, like you don't take business class, you don't bring as much weight in terms of household effects as you're entitled to, you don't store belongings. Oh, and the other one was shipping a car. If you own a car and don't ship a car. Each of those actions, saying I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, will add money to a fund. And the amount of money that gets added varies depending on the thing that you're foregoing, but basically in like the kind of 2,000 to 3,000 range per thing. And you can, if you gave up a whole bunch of things, you could potentially create a fund of up to $10,000 for an individual or up to $15,000 for a family. And you can then use that money to help facilitate other parts of your relocation. For example, you could use that money to help bring your pets with you to post. You could use that money to increase the amount of local transportation money you have available for things like car rental. You could use that money to increase the amount that you bring with you in terms of things on the plane, extra bags, that sort of thing. You could use that money to bring another person with you to post, specifically for the relocation purpose. So here's an example of how that might work. So let's say you're a single parent with 3 kids. Or maybe you're a couple with 3 kids. Either way, let's say you feel you would benefit from having one of your parents just travel with you to post. They're not going to live with you at post. They're not going to stay with you there, but it just might be helpful to get yourself and the kids there to have another adult with you. Well, that's an example of something you could use this flexible money for. So this new thing is under FSD 15, and it's called the Flexible Relocation Fund. We've kind of shortened it a little bit in the FSD world to call it the Flex Fund. But anyhow, I think you get the idea. If you give up certain things, you can then get money to use on other things. That's the gist of it anyway. Okay. By the way, I should comment to you, Pam, that because of the way my screen is set up right now, I don't have an ability to see any hands or any questions or anything. So if you feel the need to stop me, maybe just unmute yourself and let me know. Okay. So another new piece that I feel is pretty impactful. It used to be that if you were cross-posting, you could request to do so via Canada, but only via the headquarters city. And as we know, for For FS, that would be Ottawa-Gatineau. We have new language in place that allows for cross-posting to take place via either the headquarters city or the last place of duty in Canada. And what that means is if you were, posted to or assigned to, for example, the Vancouver regional office before going out abroad, and that's where your bank is, and that's where your doctor is, you could request to be cross-posted via Vancouver in that example instead of Ottawa. Okay. Translation of official documents can now be covered by the FSDs within the context of a relocation. That didn't used to be the case. I'm happy to say that it is now the case. So not a lot to explain there, but just another positive step forward. Related to that, this might sound strange, but within the context of the old or the previous version of the FSDs, if CBS had a child born at post, the expenses related to getting that child's official documents in order, including passports and other things, was not covered by the FSDs. The FSD would only cover those types of expenses if a relocation was about to happen. So if you're in the middle of your posting and you had a baby at post, passport and related expenses were not covered for the baby. Now they are. So another positive step forward there. Okay, this one's going to take a bit of explanation, but basically, under the old FSDs, FSD 15 would relocate a retiring employee to the retirement destination location of their choice. Great, up to the cost of relocation to the headquarters city. The challenge there was that in order for that to work, the person had to retire on their final day at post. Now, not everyone wants to do that. Many people, as you're aware, save some leave for the end of their career so they can kind of spend the last weeks or months of their career on leave. We've adjusted the language to allow for that to happen now. So in order to be relocated to the destination of your choice upon retirement, you don't actually have to retire on your last day at post. You can have your last day at post, and then however much leave you've saved up, you can use, and then retire and still be relocated to that destination of your choice. The only caveat is you can't do this and then take another assignment elsewhere. You basically have to stop, reporting for duty, reporting for work, and only use leave after your last day at post. Okay. So another important new piece, many of you are probably aware that a few years ago, the department stopped approving relocations to or from telework locations. They used to, and then all of a sudden they stopped. We're not allowed to use the word telework in this context for reasons I don't have time to get into, but basically, you're now allowed to, once again, relocate to or from locations other than your place of duty. That's how we're describing it here. There are some limitations in place in that not everything that applies to relocations to and from places of duty will also apply when it comes to a relocation to or from a location that is not a place of duty. But the good news is, hopefully we're putting in the past behind us that era where relocating to or from telework locations was not being approved by the department. Okay, here's another one that may not impact a ton of you, but I still think will be impactful. So let's say we've got two parents they're parents of the same children, but these two adults are no longer together. So they're co-parenting their children, but they're no longer an employee couple. But they're both posted to the same post. Under the old FSDs, the parent with the kids on their PCF could request accommodation that is suitably sized for themselves and their kids, but the parent who didn't have the kids on the PCF would not be allowed to do that. They would basically be stuck with, whoever, an accommodation size based on who's actually on their PCF. Well, we've got new language now that will allow both parents, the parents with the kids on the PCF and the parent without the kids on the PCF, to request accommodation at posts that is suitable so as to allow for the kids to sleep at either place, basically. Okay, this is another one that I feel will be particularly impactful. And it's going to take a bit of explanation, so just bear with me for a minute here. So the comprehensive healthcare plan that you're covered by when you're abroad is based on the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, also known as OHIP. So that's the primary provincial health insurance plan in Ontario. The problem with that is that while the vast majority of conditions are covered under OHIP, under the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, and therefore also the comprehensive plan, not all of them are. There's a handful of conditions that are covered by the government of Ontario, but via separate funding pathways. So not OHIP, not the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, something else. And perhaps the most impactful of those has been support for children with autism. Up until this point, basically, if you went abroad with a child or perhaps multiple children with autism, there basically was no coverage for you while you were abroad, because the funding for autism care in Ontario falls outside of OHIP. It wasn't reflected in the comprehensive coverage for employees abroad. So basically, our members were faced with quite a significant expense if they were bringing a child with autism abroad with them. So hopefully we've fixed that now. Introducing this new language in 34, the intent is basically to mirror the service that our members would have received in Ontario via the Ontario Autism Program, had it not been for the fact that they went abroad. So I'm hoping that this works. I mentioned to a member who wrote to me about this within the last week or two that this is a brand new concept, brand new language. We haven't seen it in action yet. We haven't seen it administered yet, so there may be some hiccups, but I'm hoping that this is quite impactful. So co-payments for vaccinations. Up until now, if you were abroad and there was a cost for a vaccination, while MSH or the healthcare provider may pay a portion of it, there was generally a co-payment that employees had to pay, even if the vaccination was free of charge in Ontario. So we've got new language in 39 now that covers co-payments for vaccinations that are offered free of charge in Ontario. So hopefully, moving forward, you won't be stuck with co-payments for vaccinations anymore. Okay, here's another brand new, maybe exciting, maybe not, depending on who you are, I guess, piece. There's a new FSD being introduced called FSD 49, and we're calling it the Travel Bank. Basically, it's completely changing how the how certain travel FSDs work, primarily 50 and 51. So most of you are probably aware that FSD 50 is called the post-travel allowance. It used to be called the vacation travel allowance. It allows, well, you know what that allows for, travel away from post for basically vacation purposes. And then 51 is all about family reunion. It used to be that when you qualified for one of these allowances, you had to submit a travel plan and kind of go back and forth with your FSD advisor, maybe arguing about whether the fare is appropriate and the routing's appropriate, blah, blah, blah. That's all gone now. So what's happening now with the travel bank is upon your arrival at post, you will just be automatically given whatever money you're entitled to for FSD 50 and 51 for that year. No negotiating, no bartering with the FSD advisor. That's finished. The money just goes into your account. And if the next year you qualify for more, the next year's amount just goes into your account. So hopefully that'll be a positive step forward. No more travel plans or anything like that, just automatically in your account. So I'll give this the same caveat as I gave the last piece. This is a brand new approach, brand new way of doing things. So there may be some bumps in the road while this rolls out, but I'm hoping that it'll also be a very positive step forward. Now, tied to that is how 5611 is going to be approached. So 5611 is the post-specific allowance. Some of you may not even realize you get this, but basically what it is they take the cost of one return economy ticket from your post to headquarters, and they take that amount and they divide it in 12, and every month for that year you get that 1/12 installment of a single return economy ticket. That's how it's worked up until this point anyways. And the idea has always been, here's some extra money to help you travel, basically. Well, 5611, the post-specific allowance, will also be included in full in that annual deposit into your bank account. So the monthly installments won't happen anymore for that particular FSD. You'll get the full year's amount in your account once per year, and it'll come in at the same time as 50 and 51. I'm saying this with confidence that it will come in at the same time. I hope it will come in at the same time. I don't work for the employer. I don't have any control of how well they do things here, but my hope is that it works well and you get everything once a year. Okay. So one problem we had in the pandemic, one of many, was that there were certain members posted to places where it was basically a city state, right? Like they were not in a position to leave and travel under FSD 50 because they couldn't leave their country because their country was their post. And public health restrictions, made it difficult or impossible to leave. There were a number of people that asked for what I'll call a staycation. So basically being able to use FSD 50 for a little vacation in the city where they're posted, but not actually leaving their post per se. I think we got to a point where some of those were approved, but there were a lot of hoops to jump through to get to that. Anyhow, all this being said, staycations can now be approved more easily should we ever run into another pandemic type situation, or should there be any other type of circumstance that prevents someone from leaving their post to use FSD 50. They can now get FSD 50 approved to stay in the city where they're posted. Okay, and this is our final slide in this first section where we're talking about the most impactful changes. So in terms of attending the birth of a child, it used to be in 41. One change is we've moved that to 51 now. Rationale basically being 41 is to help people who require healthcare to travel, and 51 is about helping people reunite or visit with family. So we felt it was more appropriate in 51. But the other big piece here is there's now provisions in place to allow both the employee and the spouse to travel for adoption, and that includes in situations of surrogacy. So that was not permitted before. Some of you may be aware that we had a big case with one of your colleagues that went before the labor board, where the board found in our favor. So the outcome of that decision basically is the employer's willingness to change the language and allow for both parents to travel for adoption and surrogacy situations. Okay, so that brings us to the end. As I mentioned, oh, Bert, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Paul. I don't want to break your momentum here, but there's a few questions here. I'm wondering if you want to kind of answer those questions right away, or you want to wait till the end.
I think our plan was for most questions to wait to the end.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Thank you.
That's all right, Bert. Thanks. So, as I mentioned, we're now through kind of the biggest ones, but we're now only on slide maybe 20 or 21 of 73. So there's lots of other changes, just maybe either less impactful, or maybe they might apply to fewer people, but I still think they're worth noting. Another thing I'll mention is there were a ton of changes this round that I'll call clarification changes. So this is things like fixing typos, adding, deleting commas, rephrasing certain passages to make them easier to understand, adding hyperlinks to the documents. We're not going to cover any of those today, in part because we don't have time, but also I don't think you're interested in hearing about, guess what, we moved this comma here and then we moved that comma there. So we're not touching on any of that stuff today. All right, moving on. So one of the other pieces in this round was that we added a new definition of adult dependent children. Something that's been a bit challenging, a bit problematic in recent years is when we think about children, we tend to think about minors, like, under the 18 years of age, but there are a number of our members who have adult children who are still classified as their dependent, usually because of a disability. So we've got a new definition of adult dependent children, and we've also worked with the language in a number of places throughout the directives to hopefully make life a little bit easier for those with adult dependent children. Okay, so there's certain supports in place already have been when a posting is canceled. A challenge with that was that we were running into situations where the posting wasn't necessarily canceled, but a spouse or common law partner wasn't allowed entry into the host nation because of something out of their control, often political reasons. So we've adjusted the language to basically allow for some additional support in those circumstances where the employee is still going to post, but at the last minute, the spouse or common law partner is unable to. So some people may not know where to look in the FSDs to find provisions that may be helpful in terms of supporting someone with a disability or special needs. So we've now created a list within FSD 3. So if you go to FSD 3, you can see, oh, here are the places where there might be some support available for someone with a disability or special needs. So I was asked within the last couple of weeks, what are the concessions that we made in this round? There's not a lot really. I'm kind of taking the position that there's really only 1.5, maybe 2. This would be one of them. So when you take out a posting loan, you've got your regular monthly payments, but then there's also an option to make what's called a one-time lump sum repayment. So it's just like if you have a mortgage, you know, you've got your regular payments, but you can pay it down with a bigger lump sum if you choose to. So it used to be that the minimum amount for a one-time lump sum repayment for the posting loan was $500. We've agreed to increase that to $1,500. Again, that doesn't impact the monthly payments at all. It's just if you want to make a one-time lump sum. Small change, but hopefully will be helpful. We've removed the term post-dated checks from FSD 10 and replaced it with make the necessary financial arrangements. You can still pay with post-dated checks if that's what you prefer, but we've kind of now opened it up to other possibilities as well. So some additional flexibility within 15, so which is relocation. It used to be that you could fly, you could take a boat, or you could drive, but they didn't really like mixing and matching those options. So we've got new language in the directive now that basically allows you to do just that. You can go by a combination of air and car, car and sea, air, car, and sea. Maybe I'm missing one, but anyway, you can mix and match those options. So if you want to do one part of your journey by air, another part by car, another part by sea, or just 2 of them, or just 1 of them, you can decide how you want to go. The maximum, that the cap that you'll be provided with is still based on air, but at least there's some increased flexibility to pick how you're going to get from one place of duty to another. Okay, this is another one that may take a bit of explanation, but bear with me for a minute. So there have been circumstances in recent years where someone was posted to a location that was unfurnished. So maybe they brought a lot of furniture with them, maybe they bought furniture while they were there, and they were then cross-posted to a location that was furnished or was not open to them bringing their furniture with them. You would think that the most logical thing for the employer to do in those situations would be to just ship all the unused furniture back to Canada. There were unfortunately a number of occasions where they refused to do that. So I'll say that again. The employee had furniture, or the member had furniture at one post. They weren't allowed to bring it to the next post, and the employer refused to ship it back to Canada. So hopefully we've fixed that and addressed that issue. The employer doesn't have to bring the furniture back to Canada if they don't want to, but if they choose not to, then basically they have to pay for storage at the new place of duty. So the idea is basically that that you won't be out of pocket if that were to happen to you. Okay. A few maybe boring-ish items, but I'll mention them anyway. For insurance purposes, you're likely aware that when things are being relocated, when your belongings are being relocated from one place of duty to another, the employer's insurance policy kicks in. Used to be that there was a set maximum for items grouped together in one category of $200. There's no longer a maximum for a category. Appraisals for appliances and electronics used to be required for items valued at more than $1,000. Now that's been bumped up to $1,500, so you don't need an appraisal unless it's valued at 1,500 or more. I appreciate I'm going kind of quick here, but I'm trying to get through all the slides. Appraisal for personally crafted items is now only required if it's valued at 300 or more. It used to be required for 200 or more. Moving out of insurance coverage here, we now have language in place that allows you to ask for an advance on the post-specific allowance. So this is the one I mentioned earlier, the 5611, the one that used to be 12 monthly installments and is now going to be one lump sum. Well, if you need to take a house hunting trip and you want someone to come with you, you can request an advance now on that annual lump sum so that you can bring someone with you on your house hunting trip. So unfortunately, there were a number of cases in recent years where someone's belongings were delivered contaminated with mold. And it was an absolutely horrible experience for those people that were impacted, in addition to the issue of the items themselves often having to be thrown away. There was also an accommodation issue because once the moldy items were unpacked in the person's residence, it often became no longer safe to stay there. And unfortunately, there wasn't really any language in the directive that dealt with that particular situation before, which meant that in addition to the anxiety related to potentially losing all or a significant portion of their items, members were faced with jumping through some hoops to get the employer to pay for temporary accommodation in those situations. So all this to say, we now have language in the directive specifically to help people in those situations. Did I miss one? Hold on. All right. So another kind of interesting one, there were a number of occasions where spouses returned to the headquarters city before the employee, before our member, and were denied access to the long-term storage. We were also informed of at least one case, maybe there were a few, where they were told that the spouse could gain access to the long-term storage, but then the employee would then be charged extra to access it a second time when they return from post. So hopefully we've addressed that issue with this new language. Basically, spouses can now access the long-term storage. There'll be no extra cost, providing that they're at least extracting basic furniture required for a residence. So there is a cost associated with getting into the long-term storage. So you can't say, hey, I've got, a book or, a great pair of jeans I'd like to pull out of the long-term storage and then have them dig that out for you. The minimum requirement that we agreed to at the table was basic furniture for a residence. So moving into 16, so we've moved the maximum amount for reimbursement when mortgage rates are higher relative to previous rates to Appendix B. The amount remains unchanged, but could be adjusted moving forward. It's of value to move certain things into FSD appendices instead of keeping them in the directive themselves. And the reason is basically it's easier to change things in an appendix outside of a cyclical review process relative to something that's in the body of a directive. So we've also moved a minimum equity to an appendix, but in this case there was a change. The minimum equity we've reduced from 25 to 20%. Basically, that means it'll be easier to qualify for mortgage default insurance premium coverage under the FSDs moving forward because the threshold is 5% lower. So this is the other one that some may perceive as a concession, but it was a change that we were we were obligated to make. So in terms of the months of mortgage interest penalty that you can qualify for, the amount has been adjusted down from 6 months to 3 months. But I'll explain why. The previous language that was in place was, it said that the amount was 6 months, but had to be adjusted relative to the amount in the NJC relocation directive. Well, the NJC relocation directive is 3 months now, so we had to align what was in this particular FSD with what was in the relocation directive. Just to be clear, that language is not all over the place in the directives. It was in place in this in FSD 16, so we had to make the change here, but we're not obligated to align with the relocation directive elsewhere. We've added a few definitions to FSD 16. At the time of relocation was kind of up for debate up until now. Different people had different ideas in terms of what that meant, but we've now defined it in FSD 16. It means the 12-month period starting when you receive your PCF, basically. That triggers the time of relocation. Another term that we've defined in this round is short notice. There's certain provisions that kick in FSD 16 if you're given short notice of a posting, but what short notice is was not previously defined. So anyhow, it's now been defined as 60 days or less between basically when you receive the PCF and when you relocate to post. So we've adjusted the amount for house inspections. It used to be 300. We've bumped that up to 500. But perhaps more impactful, we've now also added language that allows for potentially subsequent inspections. So you may, depending on the circumstance, and it's broken out in the directive, you may not necessarily be limited to one house inspection. You might get an additional one in some circumstances. So FSD 17 is all about helping spouses and common law partners re-enter the workforce upon repatriation. It used to be that in order to qualify for support under 17, the spouse or common law partner had to be employed within a year of within 1 year. How am I phrasing this? So they had to be employed within the year that led up to them going to post. We've now expanded that to 3 years. So as long as the spouse or common law partner was employed within the 3 years leading up to them going to post, they could qualify for the supports under FSD 17. We've also increased the window within which spouses or common law partners can undertake retraining courses. They used to have to do it within the last year of their time at post, and that's now been expanded to the last 2 years or 24 months. So another one that I hope will be helpful. So under FSD 18, which is special family separation assistance, there are certain reasons, or there were certain reasons up until now, that a spouse or common law partner could use to trigger the coverage under 18 and stay home or stay back in Canada while the employee or the member went to post. And those reasons were, up until this point, they couldn't leave Canada because of work, because of school or because of family reasons. Well, we've now added a new reason, which is discrimination. So if it's believed that the spouse or common law partner is likely to face discrimination, if they were to accompany the employee or member to post, that is now a sufficient reason to trigger FSD 18. Okay, so moving on to 25, which is shelter. When we closed off the last round, so in 2019, probably the biggest disappointment I felt from the PASO membership was the change in 25 in terms of we moved from a range of bedrooms to a specific number of bedrooms depending on family configuration. And I was optimistic at that point that it would still work out because the numbers were intended as guidelines. They're called guidelines in the directive. Unfortunately, that's not how it worked out. It seems like every MCO and HOM interpreted those numbers as kind of set in stone absolute requirements, which was not what the committee intended, but that seems to be how it was interpreted at post. So it's not much, but the employer agreed to add the word generally to the language, as in general or generally, these are the numbers you should be looking at. I was hoping for stronger language here. We asked for stronger language. The employer wouldn't go for it. So I took what I could get in this particular case. Again, I appreciate that it's not much, but my hope is it does kind of help people understand that those numbers for the space target guidelines in 2025, those bedroom numbers are not absolute requirements. There should be some flexibility there. All right, so believe it or not, you used to be required to insure while at post items in the SQ belonging to the Crown. Kind of crazy, but that's the way it was. So you're no longer required to insure household effects owned or leased by the Crown. It used to be if you wanted to hire someone to undertake some maintenance or repairs where you were staying, you had to seek approval if it was going to cost more than $200. That number has now been bumped up to $500, meaning you can hire someone to undertake repairs or maintenance without seeking approval first, as long as it's under $500. So we've got some new language that could be interesting in Appendix D of 25. Basically, there wasn't really any time parameters or anything in place in terms of what happens if you have a major appliance in your SQ that is broken or absent. Well, we've got new language built in that requires corrective action be taken as quickly as possible. Now, quickly as possible is not defined. I think that if we end up having to test this in a grievance process, that would be subject to the reasonableness test. But anyhow, I think this is a step forward in the right direction. At least there's a bit of accountability being put in place here in terms of an understanding or an expectation that if there's a missing or broken major appliance, it gets dealt with as quickly as possible. So before I get into this, I'm going to have a sip of water. So I've been talking for a while. Okay, so there have been some challenges over the years in terms of transportation of children at post with a disability. And the challenge has basically been that there is language in the directive that points to transportation options being as economical and practical as possible. And sometimes most economical does not equate to what is appropriate for a child with a disability. So I'm hoping that the new language we're introducing in 30 will address that problem, that disconnect between the employer trying to save money and what is appropriate in terms of the transportation of a child with a disability. Another issue that I'm hoping to have addressed in 30, there's been some debate over the years as to whether 30 would cover 2 round trips for parents. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's say you've got a parent that needs to accompany their child to school. Well, some administrators were taking the position, okay, FSD 30 will cover taking the child to school and then bringing the child back home from school, but nothing for the parent in between. And obviously the parent needs to, go to school and then come back home or go to work and then go back to school to get the child and then go back home after that. So we've got new language in the directive anyways that allows for round trips for parents. So hopefully that'll help deal with that issue. Lunch monitoring fees. So believe it or not, some schools at Post charge separately for watching children during the lunch period. And there was nothing in 34 that covered that until now. So we've now added language that will cover lunch monitoring fees. Sounds a little bizarre, but yeah, we actually had to add that in to get it covered. Another change to 34, up until now, tutoring expenses were only covered if there was an academic deficiency due to a relocation. So basically, if you move to a new country and your child was struggling, FSD 34 could pay for some tutoring. Well, now if you're at a post and you have to change schools because there's bullying or safety issues, tutoring can be covered in those situations as well. A new wrinkle for FSD 50. So basically, you can now use money issued to you via FSD 50 and the new travel bank to cover school field trips. And then if you have the receipts from that field trip, those receipts can be used to contribute to your certification of the allowance. So let's say, I don't know, you've only been able to certify 70% of your FSD 50 allowance. And just in case you don't know, the threshold is 75% for FSD 50. And your child has a field trip coming up and your FSD advisor won't cover it under 34. Most field trips are not covered, by the way. Under 34, you can now use your remaining FSD 50 money and cover the field trip, and then use those receipts to get you to the certification level that you need to be at. Okay, another one that may not impact a ton of you, but I think it'll be really helpful for those that it does. So 35 primarily covers the transportation of children leaving post and going to college or university. And it also covers the expense for a parent to go with the child to set them up in their dorm room or wherever they're going to be living. The problem up until this point is both the parent and the child had to travel together on the same day, same plane, everything. Well, we've changed that. We've amended the language to allow for the parent to travel separately from the child. And basically the idea behind this is maybe the parent still wants to go and help set their child up in their dorm room or wherever they're going to be staying, but they've got an important meeting or something else going on at post where they can't travel on the same day. Well, now they can still use 35 to cover their travel to get them to their child's educational institution, as long as they travel within 5 calendar days from when their child leaves. So yeah, hopefully that will help. So 41 is healthcare travel, and the old language allowed for situations where there's no one else to care for a child at post, for the member or the employee to bring what was described as a young child with them. So 41 would pay for the parent and the quote unquote young child. The problem with that is it may not always be appropriate to leave a older child at post alone for, potentially a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows, maybe longer, depending on what kind of healthcare procedure is required. So the language has been amended to allow another, not necessarily young child, to accompany the parent. So think like, let's say you've got a 14-year-old. Well, that's not necessarily a young child, but maybe you're not comfortable with them staying alone at post while you travel for healthcare for 2 weeks. Well, this new language will, while it's subject to managerial discretion, meaning the employer gets to have a say in this, does allow for teenagers basically to travel with their parents when they need to travel for healthcare. Another one that I think is going to be quite impactful, but maybe not for a ton of people, but for those that it will touch, I think it'll be very helpful. So 41, healthcare travel is for acute and emergency conditions only. So if you have a chronic condition, you can't use 41 to travel. The expectation is you wait until you're back in Canada, basically, if you've got a chronic long-term condition. The problem with that has been that there are some acute or emergency conditions that basically require follow-up treatments or follow-up visits. And there was some debate in that some administrators were taking the position that once you've had your one FSD 41 trip for your initial treatment or your initial travel, there's nothing after that. So we've got new language in 41 now that allows for follow-up treatments for acute or emergency conditions. So if, for example, someone requires treatment for cancer, that would be considered an acute condition. Previously, some administrators were taking the position that only the first trip was permitted. Well, now we've got language in the directive that would allow for the first as well as follow-up trips as well. So there's a new managerial discretion section in 41, again, for healthcare travel. First part is for allow them to consider children other than young children to travel with their parents. We've kind of talked about that already. And secondly, it allows the employer to authorize additional expenses such as quarantine expenses. You'll see in quite a few directives, we've kind of built in some pandemic-related provisions, often allowing for allowances to be expanded or increased in situations where there's quarantine requirements. And this is one of them. So a change to 50 that I think will be impactful, and this came along with the introduction of the travel bank. So it used to be once you requested your FSD 50 travel allowance, that was what you were stuck with. So if you got married or had a kid or added another dependent to your PCF after you requested the FSD 50 for that year, too bad, so sad, that was the amount you were stuck with. Well, now, because you're no longer requesting an FSD 50 amount, it's just going to be provided to you on an annual basis. If you increase the number of dependents during that year, the FSD 50 amount will increase accordingly, reflecting that you have more dependents with you at post. The flip side to that is if your number of dependents decreases during the year, the FSD 50 amount can also go down to reflect that. So basically, it can go up or down based on the number of dependents on your PCF changing. Mentioned this earlier. So 50 can be increased now based on due to quarantine requirements. And as I said, we'll see that in a number of allowances as we move through. Don't worry though, we're almost done. I think there's 72 or 3 slides, so we're at 58 now. We're getting there. So another change that I wish I didn't have to make, but some administrators were being difficult. Some administrators took the position that there was a minimum amount of time required between FSD 51 trips. That has never been true, but it didn't explicitly state anything about that in the directive. So now we've added language to 51 that says, yeah, there is not a minimum amount of time between 51 trips. If you've got an ability to do 2 or 3, you can do them. Boom, 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 back to back. There's no minimum time requirement between them. So touching back again on this concept of adult children with disabilities, we've now acknowledged in 51 that an adult child with a disability can travel with a person accompanying them. Speaking about accompanying them, I don't have a slide about this because it's not worth it, but just for your awareness, we've replaced the term escort throughout the directives with the term accompany, because some people the word escort is gone from the directive and it's been replaced with the word accompany.
Uh-oh, Paul, you're frozen to me, or is he frozen to anybody else? Uh-oh.
Yes, he's frozen, Pam.
Oh, okay. Can you hear us, Paul? Uh-oh. Paul, do you want to try logging out and coming back in, maybe?
You hear me now?
Yes, but you're still, your photo is still frozen.
And maybe that will help.
Ah, you're back.
You're back now, Paul.
Thanks.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure where I cut out there, but I'm going to turn off my video. Just maybe that'll help with the bandwidth a little bit. All right, can you still hear me? Somebody give me a thumbs up or something.
We can hear you, Paul.
All right, great. All right, so I'll leave my video off for now. So again, another instance where we've added language that allows the employer to increase an allowance due to quarantine requirements. So this particular language is in 51, family reunion. All right. We also made a change in 54 in relation to adult dependent children. We've added them to the definition of family. Again, trying to make it easier for members in these situations where they have an adult dependent child. Also, ability to increase FSD 54, which by the way is compassionate travel, in situations where there may be quarantine requirements. Okay, so 56 has a few different provisions in it, but a big one is the Foreign Service Premium, FSP. So this is the amount that members receive based on a combination of their number of years of service abroad and their family configuration at post. It stops if you're away from post for more than 25 compensation days. It used to be that it would kick back in, so start again when you returned to your residence at your post, but we've changed that to just returning to the post in general. And the rationale is basically maybe you have to quarantine somewhere other than your residence when you get back to the host nation. So this will basically just allow the Foreign Service Premium to kick back in sooner should there be another pandemic. So 58.5.1, there's kind of a long list of special things that the employer can do in certain circumstances. For example, allow for respite travel, allow for the bonus payment. Those are kind of the two most famous ones, but there's a long list of things that they can do. The way the wording was before, some people misunderstood and thought that only one of those things on that list could be applied. So we've adjusted the language to make it sure that it's clear that, it could be one or it could be one or more. So this one I'm hoping will be quite helpful. There's a lot of kind of hoops that have to be jumped through to change the hardship level of a post. And we've introduced new language in 58 that basically allows the department to do it very quickly. So hopefully when there's a sudden situation at a particular post, this new language will be helpful in that members won't have to wait, in some cases, months for a hardship level to be changed, because there's a new mechanism put in place that allows for rapid, quick changing of hardship levels. So this next change is kind of the same thing I was talking about in 56, but this one's in 58. Basically, it's the post-differential allowance, sometimes called the hardship allowance, stops when you're more than 25 compensation days away from post. It used to restart when you came back to your residence. Now it'll restart when you're arriving, basically, the city where your post is located. Okay, we're getting there. 64, almost at the end. So something that kind of was upsetting for me, well, there were lots of things that were upsetting for me during the pandemic, but one of them was that when so many of our members were evacuated under 64, the employer decided to take a one-size-fits-all approach to accountable advances. Basically, if you leave behind belongings at post, you can request an accountable advance from the department to help you replace those things you left behind at your post because you were evacuated. And during the pandemic, because it was unprecedented, because there were so many people evacuated, the employer decided it was not going to look at individual cases and it was going to take a one-size-fits-all approach. That was never the intent. And we actually have a case before the board right now waiting for a decision related to this exact issue. Anyhow, we've introduced language into 64 that says that the employer must assess each case on its own, on a case-by-case basis. So forget if there's whether or not there's another pandemic. If there's another evacuation of any post, the employer cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach. They have to look at each case on its own. Okay, another change that may not impact a ton of you, but I hope will be impactful for those that it does. There's always been an ability for the employer to protect the belongings of employees who are evacuated. But a problem we ran into during the pandemic was sometimes there were employees who were maybe not evacuated, but not able to spend a ton of time in their residence, or maybe any time in their residence, either because they're too busy at the mission, or because it's not safe for them to go back to their to their residence. So anyhow, we've amended 64 to allow for protection of the belongings of not only evacuated employees, but also employees who remain at post, who are still there at the mission. Okay. Another one that may not impact a ton of you, but hopefully it'll be helpful for those that it does apply to. So it's always been the case that if it's been 6 months since you were evacuated and you didn't go back to post and you're unable to sell your vehicle, you can sell your PMV to the Crown. But that only applied to cars. It didn't apply to motorcycles. So we've now added language to 64 that allows you to sell your motorcycle to the Crown in certain circumstances. Basically, it has to be your only mode of transportation at post to the Crown if you've been evacuated and it's been 6 months. So moving on to FSD 70, and I think this is our last actual change that we'll be talking about. Another one that came about as a result of some challenging perspectives from administrators. So stay with me for a second here, it'll be worthwhile. So you have to certify 75% of FSD 50, meaning you have to be able to prove that you use 75% of the money you were given via FSD 50. And if you do that, you don't have to give any of it back. Well, some administrators were taking the position that if you didn't reach the certification threshold, then you had to give the entire allowance back. So let's say you needed to certify 75, you only certified 70. Some administrators were taking the position, okay, well, you didn't hit the 75%. That means you have to give 100% of the allowance back. That's never been true. What's actually supposed to have happened is if let's say you got to 70% certification, then you'd have to return 30%, not 100%. Anyhow, we've got new language in 70 that confirms that is what's supposed to happen. So hopefully, if there's another administrator that takes the position that you have to return the full amount if you don't reach that 75% threshold, then we can just point to this language and say no. So that, we made it, is the entire presentation. I apologize for the length of the presentation. I'm trying
I
to
see
figure out
lots
how to
of
stop sharing
hands
here.
and thumbs up. So people saying thank you. So, and thank you, Paul. That was great. I mean, it's, this is fairly technical stuff, but I think you did a good job of making it interesting and highlighting where it will make a difference, to the people who need it. Yeah, my personal favorite is the last one. Like, really, it's a shame that we have to get language specifically in these things to prevent, just, to me, that's just blatant abuse of authority. I mean, common sense dictates that, if you have an allowance of $4,000 and you only spend $3,000, that you shouldn't have to give $4,000 back. But the fact that we have to spell that out is, I guess we have to do what we have to do. But I'm also happy to see, some of the other language that allows for discretion and, hopefully will give people a little bit more confidence in doing things that really make sense. And, for those of you listening, I mean, if you're running across this kind of thing with the administration of things, reach out to the office and we can take the case forward. Because in some of these cases, like, I think something like that personally is, I don't know if it meets the legal, or labor relations definition of harassment, but certainly meets the colloquial definition of harassment, I think, if people are picking on stuff like that.
I'd like to say what definition it meets, but I'm going to be polite here.
Yes, I have a few words that I could use as well, but yeah, my personal favorite was the one person who was evacuated, and there was a debate over whether too much of their $1,500 allowance had been spent on underwear. You know, like that is our tax dollars are at work in employees having that conversation about whether, 10 pairs of underwear is too many and half a dozen should be enough. Like that's just insane. Um, but listen, we have a couple of questions that kind of group into a couple different areas. So one about rental of property before going abroad, and whether there are any provisions in place for what happens if a tenant refuses to vacate a unit when people return. And also, was there any discussion or are there any provisions for the payment, additional funds available for the payment of the 1 month's rent that's now required in Ontario when you tell a tenant that they have to vacate when you're coming back? I didn't think so. I think those are still covered in the standard.
Yeah,
Um,
so the short answer is there's no change in the directive in relation to those issues. There's always been protection in place if the employer sends you back earlier than expected, then there's support in those situations. But if you just kind of get to the end of your posting and you come back as anticipated, and your tenant just says, I'm not leaving. Yeah, unfortunately, there's no change in terms of the support in those cases, and yeah.
Yeah, and on the advocacy side, we have been looking at reaching out to the ministries of housing in the main provinces. I mean, ultimately all the provinces, but starting probably with Ontario and Quebec, where our members mostly are posted from, to see if at least we could get them to consider those cases where somebody needs to get an eviction notice basically for a tenant that refuses to leave because a family or people are returning from Crown service abroad, to see if they would consider those urgent cases, and they would grant put them on the fast track for a hearing at least. But in terms of extra funds, there's nothing in no extra provisions in there for that. If you haven't used up your 3 months or however much it is of rent share waiver that you get, you might be able to make some argument for that, but nothing, unfortunately, nothing extra. And you're like everybody else with that problem, having to go through the legal procedures that are available in your province. Um, Another one about travel bank. Do
Mhm.
people still need to certify FSD 50 and 51 in this
Yeah, yeah.
travel bank thing?
The same certification applies, and yeah, and even though uh 5611, which is that one that used to be 1/12 every month, that's being put into the travel bank. You don't have to certify that one. You didn't have to certify it before, and you don't have to certify it now.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Also questions about FSD 51. Can somebody defer, or sorry, get an advance on an FSD 51 provisions to have somebody travel with them, like at the beginning of their posting?
50 yes, 50 yes, 51 no.
Oh, okay, okay. So that is that one. Someone else asking about
Hold
more
on.
about the new
I
flex
think I
funds.
may have misspoke there. No,
Oh,
you can request an advance on 5611. That's the one you can request in advance on, not 50 or 51.
okay.
Caught myself there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say more about the relocation travel allowance? Like, since it's already intended to cover extra baggage, transportation, why would you use the flex fund for those things? I assume it's if you want more than is in the standard, right? You want to
Yeah.
take.
So maybe all of your stuff is going to go by boat when you want some things to be with you at post sooner. I mean,
Mm. And one of the things we can use it for is for pets, right? So that to me, that was as a pet person, that to me was an important thing. I mean, it's not extra per se coverage, but you know, at least if you don't need something, you could maybe take advantage of some of those flex funds for transportation of your pets. Also, someone asking any discussion on increasing the maximum insured amount for HHE shipments. 120K for furnished, 140K
Yeah,
for
I think we talked about it this round, but there was no change.
no, no. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any last questions for Paul before we sign off? Now is your chance. We'll talk slowly to give you a chance to type it in the
If they
Q&A.
remember a question later, they could send an email to info@PAFSO, or they could attend the next info session and go through this all again.
Yes. So
Probably
and the
don't
next
need.
one is next week, and I can't remember the date.
It's Tuesday next week, I think.
Tuesday next week at noon Ottawa time, I think,
Yeah.
or something like that. Yep. And there were quite a few more people signed up for that one, so we'll see who makes it. And Tyler says thank you to the negotiators. Maybe could I just ask? I mean, I know like when we talk about concessions, we think about what things we had that we had to give up, right? And we're really lucky that there weren't you know, there were only a couple of very minor things in that, but was there anything major to you that we were trying to get that we didn't manage to, that they refused to discuss, anything like
I
that?
mean, yes. I'm a little bit limited in what I can say because the time of the table is, for the most part, protected by negotiations confidence.
Mm.
I mean, I'll say this. It always shocks me because it happens every round, whether it's bargaining or FSDs. There are some proposals you go in thinking, this is a slam dunk. The employer is going to love this. It'll be easy. They're going to say yes right away. And then it's brick wall. But then the opposite happens too. There are proposals you go, well, there's no way they're going to go for this, but you know, members wanted me to propose it, so I'll give it a shot. And boom, right away, they're all on board and want to do it. So, you know, you never know from what perspective someone is looking at something. I mean, I don't mind commenting that there were a little over 300 proposals filed this round between us and the employer, and we left the round with 147 agreements. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. I mean, these are the biggest changes that we've seen in a long time. Um, and aren't there also, is this the one where we got some language on, excuse me, adjusting, adjusting amounts according to consumer price index and a couple of different things, right?
Well, that's been in place
That's an
for a
important thing
while
as
for a
well.
lot of things. I don't know if we made any changes this round, but yeah, most financial amounts, not all, but the vast majority are either tied to actual expenses, like what does airfare cost right now, like that kind of thing, or they're indexed annually based on CPI.
Okay.
So the financial amounts are not static. There's a small number that are just kind of set in a certain place. Like I don't know, like the house hunting trip this round, we went up from like $200 or $300 to $500. That's not an amount that is indexed on an annual basis, but like amounts for local transportation, for example, the incidental relocation expense allowance, those types of things are indexed annually and go up each year.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions. So, given that it is, well, yeah, it's already 7:30. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul, for that great presentation. Thanks, Bert, and thank you for everybody for the great questions. Thanks also to Logan McNamara, who was the other member of our executive committee who was on the FSD committee with Paul and was there for the discussions and representing, you know, the perspective of people who have been actually out at post. I mean, I think we got a really good outcome this time. Worked really well with the employer side as well. And, you know, hopefully we've got something that should be sustainable and that'll make a difference to everybody going forward. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Et à la prochaine, which will be next week at next Tuesday
Tuesday.
at noon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Merci tout le
Thanks,
monde.
everybody.
Bonsoir.
Au revoir. Bye bye.